Why don't you log in and complete that while you're out?
Thank you for letting me come and talk to you for a few moments. Some of you may or may not know me. I'm Don Ruff. I'm Senior Vice President at Capital Title. I've been in the real estate industry for about 30 years, 25 of those as an attorney. I've been general counsel to lenders, mortgage brokers, title companies. I've represented every national title insurance underwriter in the United States. Through my litigation practice, I've been on TV and the newspaper. I wrote a column where people wrote in and asked questions regarding real estate, and I answered those. Been on the radio answering questions regarding real estate, and basically that's what I do for Capital Title. And I'm here to talk today, particularly about the mortgage fraud statute. And part of that, if you got a copy of it recently, I heard Larry mention that you did, is that there is what I would determine as a safe harbor. And one of those things for us to get a safe harbor in there so that our company isn't liable, because if an employee commits mortgage fraud, the company is liable. And one of those things is for us to have this lecture, and for you to hear this lecture and get a copy of the statute and realize the code of conduct that we have regarding mortgage fraud in this company. And as I told you, I've been a trial attorney for the last 25 years, and one of the best ways to remember things was to actually have some sort of a line that stood out during the trial. If any of you have heard of if the gloves don't fit, you must acquit, that worked. You in religion and in your childhood, you heard stories, and that got through the moral of the story, and you understood things from stories. So to go along that line, I'm going to start by telling a story, and I'm going to use Allison. You shouldn't have sat in front. The very first thing is, Allison, I see a rainbow over there. You see the rainbow?
They're pot of gold at the end.
Yeah, you see that rainbow then. And part of the reason, I'm going to speculate that part of the reason that you see the rainbow is because you want this lecture to move on, and you figure that will help me. And that, there you go, and that you know you have work on your desk you've got to get back to, and you know that let's see what else, that you want to be cooperative so that you're there, and that you want to get me off your back because I'm the lawyer that's irritating, and you want to have this move on, right? So all those things are all moving you to see this rainbow, right? Okay, so now I need you to close your eyes. Okay, so now she has her eyes closed. I believe that everybody else in the room now can see the rainbow because she has her eyes closed, can't we? Everybody? Now we all see a rainbow now that Allison has her eyes closed. Okay, thank you, Allison. That was all. All right, and part of the reason I went through that is because that's what's going to happen to you in mortgage fraud. They're going to try and convince you to see the rainbow that they see, that somehow this isn't a major thing, just let this document go through, just if you just don't look, if you look the other way for just a second, that we're fine. And so we're going to start to talk about the mortgage statute. We're going to go through some of the elements of it. And the very first one is, makes a false statement or misrepresentation. Now, they're going to try and convince you that somehow this isn't a major deal. They're going to want you to see their rainbow. Let's go back to our metaphor. They're going to want to convince you to see their rainbow. As their loan officer, as the processor, as anybody involved in this transaction, they're going to want you to see the rainbow. And you need to realize that you shouldn't. You shouldn't. Because basically, some of the things you might think is, well, you know, I want to be cooperative, or I'm not really sure whether or not this really is a violation, and so you don't bring it up. If you think that if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a dog, it is a duck. And so if you see that there's something wrong, you should be asking questions. And the reason that we want you to ask questions is that the very first one talks about false or misrepresentation material facts. It goes on after that to describe fail to disclose a material fact during the mortgage process. That's the close your eyes portion of our metaphor. I don't want you to close your eyes to the fact that somebody else is doing something. That is still a violation. Even if you're not actively involved in that, but you close your eyes and let it happen, that's a violation of this statute as well. Let's move on to that one. Basically, one of the things I've seen most, just to give you some examples, this is like the arm's length transaction. If you actually know if you've seen those affidavits that state that this is an arm's length transaction, and you know that it isn't, and you close your eyes or you just let that go through, that's mortgage fraud. And so potentially we're in the middle of this violation. So you want to make sure you don't do that. Or a bank statement that you might think is altered, you need to look into that and make sure that it's not. The next one that they talk about is during the mortgage lending process uses false pretenses. Let's particularly say that you know that it's not going to, give you an example that might come up for you, no, it's not going to be a residence. They claim that this is going to be a residential property, you know they don't intend to live there. And so that would be a misrepresentation for false pretenses. In fact, false pretenses in this statute And the reason they passed this statute was because previously they only had things like false pretenses or forgery to charge regarding mortgage fraud, so they passed a particular statute regarding mortgage fraud. They upped the ante too, because now it's any mortgage over $100,000 is 20 years and a $500,000 fine. So they even made the penalties greater too, and it certainly is a felony. And so they passed this statute to have something that they could claim when they see all these mortgage fraud issues. The next one, user facilitates a false statement or misrepresentation by another person. So again, that's the one where you're closing your eyes, you're allowing them to do it. Don't think because you're not doing it that it's still not mortgage fraud or that you're not involved in it. So make sure that you don't let somebody else do it because you're closing your eyes, as in our metaphor. Next one is receives or attempts to receive any proceeds. So if you get your commission and there's actually mortgage fraud going on, then you've actually received money while you knew that some other mortgage fraud was potentially happening. That then becomes a violation of this statute as well. Files or causes to be filed with the Register of Deeds. Documents involved in the mortgage lending process that the person knows to contain deliberate material misstatements or misrepresentations. Potentially like a deed that you knew was invalid. Somebody says, oh, that person's just not around anymore. I can sign it for my wife. I can do this. I can do that. Anytime you hear about a document that's going to be recorded that involves this process. Again, mortgage fraud. The next portion talks about conspiring to do any one of the things we've just described. Or fail to disperse in accordance with the settlement closing statement for the mortgage. One of the things I've seen this for is like the short sales, where we have these short sale negotiators that suddenly come up with another way they're going to get paid that wasn't on the HUD, or some other payment that's going somewhere else that isn't shown on the HUD. Those are all potentially mortgage fraud, and we can't allow them to get away with that, and neither can you. Solicits, encourages, or coerces another to do that. So this is potentially where the other person is pressing you to try and get you to do that, or you press a processor, or a processor presses another person to just let something go. Again, either closing your eyes to this rainbow that somebody else sees that it's really not that bad, everything's a rainbow, and they want you to close your eyes to make sure that this happens, and that's what we're trying to avoid. To move through the rest of the statute, if it goes very quickly then, a crime resident under this section shall not be predicated solely upon information lawfully disclosed under the federal information disclosure laws. That means that they can use anything they can to try and convict you of this, so that moves on for them. The next one is venue. It tells venue is a legal term, says where they're going to bring the lawsuit. So the lawsuit is going to be wherever they describe here, which is in the county where the residential property which a mortgage loan is obtained is sought or located. It's one of the necessities for a statute to say where it's going to be. So if it happens and it's in Oakland County, it's going to be in the Oakland County Circuit Court. After that, we talk about the penalties. The penalties, if it's under $100,000, is 15 years and $100,000. Any loan over $100,000 is $500,000 and 20 years. Each violation of this section constitutes a separate offense. If somebody were to violate the section, it would mean that they could be charged with multiple crimes, $500,000 for every single one of them, 20 years for every single one of them. Next section. This section does not prohibit a person from being charged with, convicted, or punished for any other violation of law that is committed by a person while violating this section. As I mentioned before, they used to charge under here, before they brought on the mortgage fraud statute, they used to charge for false pretenses or forgery. False pretenses is only a misdemeanor even, and forgery can actually, depending on how many counts there are, can actually become a felony, but they just weren't strong enough, so that's why this statute was passed, because it's a felony and it's very strong. Now, this is the section, the reason that we're actually having this lecture. It says it's an affirmative offense for an employer, because basically an employee makes an employer responsible if mortgage fraud is committed. And one of the ways, and that's why we're having this lecture, for an employer not to be responsible is for them to follow the elements that are in this section. Those elements would be that we have a prohibition against the conduct that violates this, and that's that first portion of your code of conduct. Penalties are discipline for violation of policy, again, in our code of conduct. A process for educating employees and agents concerning the policy, that's what it's about today. If anybody has any questions, you're free to ask me about it, either now or after the lecture, to make sure you're educated about this process. And finally, that we run a criminal history check on each of the employees, and that we wouldn't hire somebody who we found had a criminal history. The defendant demonstrates that it enforces the written policy described in subdivision A. So we'd have to enforce this policy as well. before the violation of the sex offender committee, the written policy describing the subdivision. So before anybody committed this, we talked to you about the statute and the policy for violating. So that's basically why this entire little lecture is being given by me, to meet this portion of the statute, to make it that if an employee were to make the bad decision of becoming involved in mortgage fraud, that the employer wasn't responsible. The next section just talks about the other property that can be used. The next section is for if a person is defrauded, they will actually be able to get rid of the mortgage and take it off their property, and tells them their rights. So the next section is actually for the defrauded, the person who got defrauded. The final section just gives definitions so that when you're reading the statute, you understand what the definitions in the statute are about. So basically that's what this lecture is about. Don't let somebody convince you to see the rainbow that doesn't exist, and don't let them convince you to close your eyes while something else goes on. Any questions? Thank you very much for letting me come in.